I'd seen people blown up. I'd seen people die in front of me. I'd been shot at, but this was so horrific. The sight, the smell, the shattering of my worldview, that the only thing I could go on was just denial. My name is David Wood. I'm a journalist, retired mostly, still working on books. I was doing a story on Mozambique, and it was a time when there was a war going on with next door Rhodesia, the white regime in Rhodesia, and black nationalist guerrillas were largely camped out in Mozambique. Those guerrilla camps were mostly women and children because when guys signed up to go with the rebel army, that guy brought his family with him. So there was a massacre of these, non-combatants, basically, which I stumbled across, and that drove me to my knees. Partly, it was the horror of seeing what the Rhodesians had done. They shot as many people as they could, and then before they left, they set the brush on fire so that there were any survivors, they burned to death. And I got there at dawn the next day, and the smell was overpowering. The sight of all these burned bodies was something that I could not have imagined. And there was something else going on, and that was that my whole moral belief system was that things like this didn't happen, that the world was basically a good place, and that nonviolent resistance could overcome any force. Well, this completely shattered that whole set of ideas. When I got back to the capital, Maputo, in Mozambique, I filed a story to Time magazine. It's a pretty clinical description of what happened. There's no emotion in it at all. No mention of the smell or anything like that. And then I wrote my parents a letter, which I said, just been on this 3-week journey through Mozambique, and nothing much interesting happened. It was pretty much a waste of time. No mention of any massacre or anything like that. Denial works. I think resilience is your ability to overcome obstacles, whether they're psychological or real. I think there's a component of resilience which is physical, because I've been in situations where I felt my resilience was a little low and I couldn't really operate physically the way I wanted to. But I think that's probably a small part of it. The bigger part of it is psychological, and it's partly a belief in yourself, a belief in your ability to overcome obstacles, self-confidence. All those things make up a sense of resilience, and an ability to look beyond the immediate crisis, to recognize, I'm good, this is a little rough, but I can get through this. That's part of resilience. And then denial is also, I think, a good part of resilience. My experience has been that we all walk around with a reservoir of resilience. And in ordinary times, we draw on that a little bit. Bad things happen, we shrug it off, we're okay, we keep going, that's fine. There are things that happen in life that are so traumatic that they empty out your reservoir of resilience. And at that point, you need outside help, whether it's spiritual, whether it comes from a community, whether it comes from a loved one, but you need to have some kind of outside source of resilience, otherwise you just can't go on. By the time it got to the war in Bosnia, which was 1992, 3, 4, 5, I became aware that journalists were targets. It got too dangerous for me to go out by myself as a war correspondent. So from that point on, I only embedded with American troops. Soldiers and Marines. I spent a year embedded with a Marine battalion. We spent 6 months training, and then we went to Somalia. This was during the Black Hawk Down episode. It was during that experience that I spent a year with them that I began to see how they developed that community of combat soldiers and Marines. Starts in basic training or boot camp where the drill sergeant says, this is your battle buddy. You're responsible for that person no matter what. And that rule eventually becomes a value, an internalized value, because there's somebody watching out for you. And that idea, it develops into what I had seen as unconditional devotion. Unconditional, which means you would lay down your life for your buddies, even for someone you don't like. And when bad things happen, that's what they lean on. And I've seen soldiers and Marines in the war zone have their resilience reservoir pretty much depleted. And at that point, it's that community that helps refill their resilience and gets them through bad times. There are still bad things that happen, but in the moment of trauma, in the moment of crisis, it's that tight community that gives them resilience. The last time I was in Afghanistan, I was almost 60 years old. So I was almost 3 times as old as everybody else there. So there was a kind of they felt like you would about your grandfather being there. Right? So I was on a mission with the Marines, and there was a Marine gunnery sergeant who sort of adopted me. He was a big bear of a guy. And we went on a mission, a helicopter raid. And when we got down the ramp of the helicopter, he pushed me down in the dirt behind this sort of berm, and we were taking fire. And then when we could, he just yanked me upright, and I had a full backpack on. So I was pretty heavy, but I felt protected by them. And I felt like I could keep my reservoir of resilience pretty full while I was doing my job. And, my job was get a story. So the whole time this is going on, I'm thinking, what is the story here? The story is this raid. Okay, what do I need to tell this story? So I'm busy. But the gunner had me, and that was a good feeling. To work to build a sense of community with whoever you're with, whether those are other journalists, whether they're civilian NGO workers, or whoever you come in contact with. Or, if you're lucky enough to be embedded, and I think that's a great way to do the reporting, to develop, to work on, to be aware of that sense of community so that it's there when you need it, because you'll need it.